You get
And Rich, you mentioned the question of depopulation. This, of course, is a long-time policy of the British royal family. And of course, before that, it goes back to Malthus and the idea of the Malthusian policy that you can't keep up the food supply with the growing population, so therefore you have to let people die off.
yeah.
This is not just some old meme. This actually was adopted as U.S. national policy under Kissinger.
Take the first step towards online privacy. Get NordVPN.
When tyranny becomes law, rebellion becomes a duty. So said Thomas Jefferson. Go to bit.ly/lawful tax protest or bit.ly/make war history and find out why it is a criminal offence to pay central government or local government taxes in the UK. I am joined once again by Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization and Alex Krainer, who is the naked hedgie, whatever that means, whatever it is to be a naked hedgie, he is that. I'll have links to where you can find them in the description below, and we're going to be talking about the parlous state of Europe and what is Mr. Musk doing. You can keep up with Alex Krainer's extraordinary analysis and writing at his Substack, and also make money using his trend-following strategy. To find out more, go to bit.ly/CryptoRichAlexK, bit.ly/CryptoRichAlexK. Keep up with Harley Schlanger's insightful analysis on macro politics at larouche.org, link in the description below. Hey Harley, hey Alex, thank you so much for making yourselves available. Harley, do you want to talk about? By the way, as you know, I'm back from like 3 weeks away in my home country, and back from one rather dire situation to another dire situation in the UK, and it's also getting pretty dire in Germany and the rest of Europe. Harley, do you want to start with because you mentioned about Elon Musk
Sure.
taking on Germany and the UK?
Well, I just came back from 2 weeks in Austria, where there's another situation brewing there, where the Freedom Party, which is sort of like the alternative for Deutschland for Austria, has now been given the right to form a government, because the two other major centrist parties couldn't do it. So in this context, with the war, I think, winding down in Ukraine, they're trying to keep it going with this Ramstein Air Base meeting that Lloyd Austin attended, and Biden's releasing another 500 million here and talking about 3.1 billion more to go in the next 10 days. And they're emptying out the U.S. Treasury. And for whom? Where's it going? But in this context, then, you have some very interesting developments. And I just want to make 2 points to start. One, a lot of what Trump is saying is trolling and a distraction. I really don't think he intends to make Canada the 51st state. I really don't think he's going to try and buy Greenland. And I think it was very funny that the president of Mexico trolled him back about changing the Gulf of Mexico, the name of it, and she suggested changing the name of the United States. So a little good-natured humor is actually very useful, because what's being done is an attempt to disrupt the transition to Trump around Ukraine, to ramp up the situation, the genocide in the Middle East, and to create barriers that will be impenetrable between Russia, China, and the West. And so Trump has to play a game to keep himself somewhat outside of the distraction. And so he creates his own distraction. Now, in the midst of this, what I think Musk is doing is not so much a distraction as a spear point going at two completely dysfunctional situations. Starmer came in with a very large vote, but it wasn't for him. It was against Sunak and the Tories. And from what I can see, the Starmer is collapsing very quickly. His intent is what? To try and become friends with Trump? Then we see the pathetic case of the German foreign minister going to Syria and making a fool of herself, saying that it was because of Germany that Assad fell. So the situation in Germany is chaotic. So in that context, the discussion last night between Elon Musk and Alice Weidel, the chancellor candidate for the Alternative for Deutschland, even though you could see in her the lack of polish, the lack of professionalism, she admitted she didn't know fully what to say about the situation in Southwest Asia. Nevertheless, it was an honest, open discussion about the need for change.
Yeah.
And I think that's become the watchword in Europe. And Alex, I know you're watching this very closely also. everyone knows there needs to be a change. The question is to what? And that's why there's so much focus on Trump right now. I'll say some things later about what we're trying to do to ease the way for Trump by getting the confirmation of Gabbard and Patel, which I think will be even more disruptive for the establishment. But that's what it needs. The establishment needs a thoroughgoing shaking, one that they hopefully will not come back from.
Harley, thank you for that. And oh my God, there is so much that you've encapsulated so well. Where do we even begin? Alex, over to you.
Okay, so I would just like to add that I agree with everything that Harley just said. Thank you.
And I agree with everything both of you have said. Shall we call it a wrap?
Well, I have to say it's very, very inappropriate when foreign billionaires interfere in our very precious and delicate democratic processes here in Europe.
I know, but Alex, we're not talking about George Soros yet, are we?
No, I was gonna get to that.
Presidential medal winner.
Unless it's George Soros or Bill Gates or someone like that.
Right.
There's billionaires and there's billionaires. There's the good ones who abide by our values, and then there's the really, really bad ones, which we don't like Musk or Trump. But joking aside, one thing that I've observed since we last spoke, I spent a few days in Croatia, and one of the things that I was taken aback a little bit is we had on national television a full broadcast of Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker Suite on television. And I thought, that's really strange. I mean, it is, it was Christmas Eve, and it is a Christmassy, theme and all that, but it's also a Russian composer. And, it wasn't so long ago, 3 years ago, people were just falling over themselves to cancel anything Russian just to show, And so plays and concerts by Tchaikovsky, ballets and concerts by Tchaikovsky were being canceled. University courses in Russian literature were being canceled. It was really like a rabid, hysterical response to the war in Ukraine. And now we had this, and it wasn't a Croatian production. It was broadcast from Milan's La Scala. And so Croatian television was just rebroadcasting what was broadcast on Italian television, and I couldn't tell which channel it was. I don't know if it was one of the Rai state channels or if it was one of the private channels, but it doesn't matter. It really was very peculiar to see this, and I thought something about this feels deliberate, and purposeful. And then I couldn't take it, so I had to look it up online, and sure enough, they also picked Rudolf Nureyev's choreography for the production, and Rudolf Nureyev was also a Russian ballet dancer. He's dead now, but it was his choreography. And then, even worse than that, or even better than that, they invited a conductor from St. Petersburg, who is the head of the St. Petersburg Mariinsky Theater. And so it was very overtly Russia-friendly evening that was broadcast to all of Italy and all of Croatia. And so to me, that was that. And then I looked. I remember watching this with my parents. I'm not a ballet fan. I wouldn't choose to watch ballet on television, but this was just so strikingly beautifully done that it kind of captivates you. Like when you come across a World Wrestling Federation on television, and you just kind of watch it because it's so. Okay, so this wasn't like World Wrestling Federation.
Good analogy.
Not quite as poetic as World Wrestling.
Sorry.
When you watch something that's compelling.
Can you go back like 15 seconds and cut that part when I compared? I'll never rinse this off of myself. I compared Nutcracker in La Scala with World Wrestling Federation. I don't know, but I mean to say, like when you're watching something that you wouldn't ordinarily watch, just because it's something about it is so different that it captivates your attention. And then we ended up watching it to the end. I think we got it halfway through, and we watched it through the end. And it was really, really a beautiful production. And I think it also kind of marks a very big contrast between something that's beautiful and wholesome versus all this ugly stuff that we're being nonstop inundated with, because we're getting these, like the opening ceremonies of the Paris Olympics and the closing ceremony, and all this LGBT nonsense. And I wrote an article about this and published it online. And then, from readers, I got feedback. And, at the same time, I think somewhere in London, they're presenting another Tchaikovsky ballet, Swan Lake. Except this one, when you look at it, it's so ugly and dark and dystopian looking. And not only that, it's also very gay, because they, all the swans, which should be ballerinas, are all men. So it looks really, really bizarre. But then everybody's going about how bold and courageous and 21st century and modern it is, and revolutionary and all of these things. And I think that people around Europe are ready to do away with all that. And I think that it shows not only in the political processes, it's showing in the culture. And, culture is always upstream from politics. And then same thing, we had the presidential elections on the 29th December in Croatia. And so there was the sitting president, who is not independent, but he's not part of the ruling party. The ruling party has formed a government, Croatian Democratic Union. And so he was going up against the ruling party's candidate. And, in the presidential campaign, the ruling party thought that it would be a good idea to smear the sitting president as a Putin stooge, as a pro-Russian player, because he hasn't been very enthusiastic about the war in Ukraine and about sending Croatian military officers to, train Ukrainians and whatever they do. And so 0 Croatian military officers have been involved in training the Ukrainians in this war. Anyway, so they ran a pretty aggressive and ugly smear campaign against him of being a Putin stooge. And so when people voted in the first round, he got almost 50% of the vote, versus less than 20% for the pro-freedom and democracy candidate. So that, and Croatia, we are a Catholic country. As I grew up there. We do have a mildly Russophobic culture. It's not maybe as rabid as in Poland or in the Baltics, but it is a little bit. We were always infatuated with the West, and I would say at best disinterested in Russia. And so the fact that people voted so strongly in favor of Putin's stooge, in spite of all the propaganda, is, I think, a very, very telling sign that, and Croatian media is just as bad as everywhere else. It's really bad. People are saying enough of the nonsense. And so I think that very, very radical changes are ahead of us. And I think that the imperial ruling establishment at this point only has one way to deal with this, and this is with repression and censorship and harsh measures that only further loses it popular support and unmasks the whole imperial edifice for what it is and always has been. And so that means that its time is expiring now.
Yes.
Alex, you mentioned the Croatian vote. The other government that's fallen since the last time we talked, Rich, is Canada. Justin Trudeau.
Correct.
And this opens up the whole question of, will there be any governments that have popularity? And the idea that lurking behind this is somehow a Russian plan to impose right-wing governments in all these countries is the kind of misreading that's gotten the establishment into trouble in the first place. They don't realize how unpopular their governments are. Now, I just wrote an article today about the tragedy of Jimmy Carter. And, he's in the news. He died at 100. And there's all this nostalgia, and he was really a good gentleman, and he tried to bring peace to the Mideast. The fact is, he's the one who introduced the Islamic card, the Islamic fundamentalist card through Brzezinski. He and Brzezinski sabotaged SALT too. He and Brzezinski launched the Green Revolution. And so much of what he did was part of the arc that we're in today. But the problem then is that after his presidency, he actually did make an effort to try and do something in the Middle East to differentiate himself from Brzezinski. The problem is he didn't do it when he was president. He couldn't do it. And this is what you're talking about now. The tragedy of Western civilization is that we have a go along to get along culture, which is controlled by these multinational corporations and media cartels. And this is something Brzezinski was also responsible for with the idea of the technotronic era. That how do you move away from industrial society to drugs and entertainment and throw away the classics? And so I think it's very relevant what you're bringing up about the Nutcracker. I had the opportunity to take my children to a children's version of the Magic Flute, which was totally charming. The music, Mozart's music is so wonderful. But watching all these young kids get excited about Papageno and the dragon and the Queen of the Night, and realizing that if we had access to this kind of culture, we wouldn't have the Starmers and the Macrons and the Baerbachs, who presently are committed to this course which could lead to the extinction of the human race. So I was happy when I saw your column about the Nutcracker. I was glad to see that, because this is the kind of thinking and kind of cultural shift that's necessary, as opposed to waiting to see, will Trump do what he should do? Is there a leader, a strong man who will do it? No, it's got to be a shift in the culture, because we got to this point because the culture shifted backwards to what Lavrov calls the post-Christian era.
Yes. Well, yes, absolutely. And this is why I suppose the WF are so out to destroy culture, so that we lose our anchor to family, to religion, to culture, and thus become easier to manipulate. Now, I want to take it back to Musk and Germany, because I listened to that interview with AfD. I'm curious about the response that there is in Germany since that interview. And then I can also tie in with how in Britain, the police, the counter-terrorism unit, are investigating Elon Musk's tweets.
Well, I can tell you two things. I have a friend who's a parliamentarian from the Alternative for Deutschland, Rainer Rockfuss, and I've brought him on to some American media podcasts and radio. Yesterday we were on in Salt Lake City, and the response to him talking about the shift in Germany and Musk endorsing the AfD. Musk didn't just talk to Vital, he endorsed the Alternative for Deutschland. And the response from the audience in Salt Lake City was electric. What is the AfD? How come we don't hear about this? And why is it extremist to be against war? And why is it right wing to want to have industry? And we're starting to see that in Germany, in my neighborhood, which is a very middle class, typical German. People work hard, they play hard, they don't express much emotion. They're starting to get emotional. And when you bring up to them that they're taught, the Pistorius, the defense minister, is talking about becoming war ready by turning the metro stops in Berlin into potential bomb shelters, that's starting to hit home. And I think that's why there's a growth of support for the Alternative for Deutschland. Also, the other polemic they're using is that Meretz, the front runner from the Christian Democracy, is Mr. BlackRock in Germany. He was the chairman of BlackRock Germany, and he's a committed transatlanticist, committed war hawk. And the Christian Democrats and the so-called center-right parties are putting every hope in him. And he's not exactly a charismatic figure. So I think there's going to be, and of course the other thing is the economy here is terrible. The electric prices go up again. The loss of the last bit of Russian oil and gas is going to have a huge impact. Volkswagen is announcing possibly 25,000 layoffs. This will ripple through the whole economy. And what's the alternative? Building solar panels? And I'll tell you, in Potsdam, we've had 2 days of sun since November. So I don't think that's a very good option.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Not only that, but the same people who want us to switch to solar panels also want to dim the sun.
Yeah, that's right.
How does that work?
That's Bill Gates' plan, isn't it?
Yes, that's one of Bill Gates' plans.
Yes.
There's many plans.
He wants to sell a lot of aluminum foil, I think.
Maybe, but then he's also working on GMO mosquitoes and 21st century's toilets and artificial meat, dimming the sun, mRNA vaccine. He's a busy guy. And he's doing a lot of things that nobody asked for. Isn't that amazing? Nobody asked for that. Nobody elected him. Yeah, he's doing all these things. He's even giving money to these, I don't know what you call them, associations or something that are popularizing the ideas, and I'm not even joking, this is literally the truth, trying to popularize the idea that 2 + 2 can be 5. I'm not joking. He's given money to organizations that are doing that.
They really, really are out to attack us at every conceivable angle.
Yes.
Every which way. Now, I think, Harley, and I'm going to lay this out, I actually think the AfD are going to win. I think they're going to, I hope as well, right, that they are going to win, or they're going to be in a position where they're going to have significant amount of power come the elections in February, which will be a shockwave throughout the European Union.
Well, what they're lamenting is that they wanted to not have the no confidence vote last month, because that meant the elections were going to be in February. The no confidence vote. So there's a chancellor election February 23rd. The AfD was figuring if they had till September, they could build up more of a head of steam. Now, I think there's a rethinking going on how to proceed in the campaign. And the one problem I see is too much reliance on Trump and not enough on just going out and doing an American-style campaign where you knock on doors and talk to people about, we want to stop the wars, we want to get rid of this green nonsense, we want to do something to ensure that we don't have immigrants flowing into the country, and do it not as an anti-immigrant policy, but by saying, why don't we work on exports from Germany to help these other countries rebuild after the wars that NATO has employed to destroy them. So there's a lot that can be done positive. And I think that's what has to be emphasized. And some of that's coming across with Vital and some of the other candidates. And the end of the talk with Musk was fascinating about the extraterrestrial imperative, as it's known in Germany from Kraft Erika. The idea that you go into space not as a hobby or like Bezos for a fun ride, but to actually expand the realm of human activity in the universe and increase the creative input. More scientists, more engineers, more advanced technologies, more harnessing the power of nature for the benefit of man. And I thought that last part of the discussion was actually quite beautiful. And I noticed Vital was moved by it herself. Did you notice that?
I didn't like that last bit. I wanted to stick with the hard politics. I didn't pay too much attention to it. So sorry. Okay. And then in Austria, the right-wing party, and it's funny how they're all far right. They're all everybody's far right. Everybody the WF don't like or agree with is far right. So they're now going to be able to form a government. Now, what's that's going to portend for Austria?
Well, it's going to be difficult because the People's Party and the Conservative and the Socialist Party don't want to do it. They're going to try and sabotage it. But they finished second and third, and the Freedom Party was clearly in front. So far, in fact, that von der Bellen, the president of Austria, who's a Green Party member, finally said, you other two guys leave, we're going to do it with the Freedom Party. Now, one of the issues in Austria is the relations with Russia. Austria is not keen on being part of NATO. There's growing concern about Austria staying in the European Union. So there are a lot of unresolved issues, but it's not as far advanced as Germany because the economy is still relatively decent in Austria. But in Germany, you can tell there's been a deterioration. All you have to do is ride Deutsche Bahn right now. And it's disruptive. It doesn't go from city to city smoothly as it used to. It's not on time as much anymore. And the prices have gone way up. So the quality of life is definitely declining in Germany. Now, one of the things the AfD is saying, and this is one grouping in the AfD, is that the most important thing is not just ending the war, but reestablishing a good, vital relationship with Russia. And have Germany be part of a bridge between Western Europe and even the other side of the Atlantic to Russia and China. And the Germans, of course, have in the past done a lot of trade with China. Germany, Russia have been on and off for a long time. In fact, that's the core of British geopolitics, is to keep Germany and Russia apart. So I think what Alex said about change is coming. There are going to be a lot of shocks. Can the AfD win? I don't think so. But I think even if they get upwards of 25 to 30%, it will be a big shock because there will be a great difficulty pulling together a coalition government that will work without them. And yet the whole line is we can't let them in. We can't have a coalition with the AfD. And I think that's why Germany's headed for even worse times under Merz.
Yeah. Alex, any commentary on Germany?
Well, studying history a little bit, it turns out that Germany, it's hard to tell this from the day-to-day events, but it turns out that Germany, when it is in a crisis, has a fairly strong inclination to turn to Russia.
Yeah.
And I think that we're going to probably see that again with fullness of time. Germany is actually surrounded by, what are nominally allies and friends, but who are in reality hostile to Germany, namely France, Belgium, particularly Poland, and to an extent even the Scandinavian countries. And there's some deliberateness in, let's say, Poland's antagonizing Germany. This was even explicitly stated by Poland's current foreign minister, Radoslaw Sikorski, who's actually a British agent.
Yeah.
He was caught discussing with another Polish politician. I think it might have been Jacek Rostowski or Mateusz Morawiecki, one of those people. They had a private meeting, but their conversation was recorded and it was leaked out by this Polish magazine Wprost.
Mm-hmm.
And Sikorski was overtly saying that we are going to, and this is before the Ukraine war, right? This is before any of these things happened, the Nord Stream 2 Russian special military operation. He said, we are going to be aggravating Russia and Germany. And this is what they have been doing. And so, if you have enemies to the east, enemies to the west, and you're an occupied country by another, how do you call it, nominal ally, but in actual fact, a hegemon, you only have one credible partner in the region to turn to for help, for partnership, for constructive relationship, and that's Russia. There's no other game on the European continent for Germany. So I think it's only a matter of time before people wake up and say, we need to make nice with Russia, and I think that eventually they will. Is it going to be with veto? I don't know, but it's going to be at some point. I'm convinced that's going to happen.
Okay, thank you. And then Romania, because there were demonstrations today in Romania about the cancelled presidential election, the second round. Either of you have any commentary on that?
Well, the Atlantic Council famously had this conference, the Summit for Democracies, where they talked about the world divided between the authoritarians on one side and the democracies on the other, with, of course, the EU being the center of democracy, the unelected bureaucrats of Brussels and the NATO war hawks being the enforcers of democracy, and the idea that when a country votes against their wishes, the elections can be annulled. But this brings me back to something that I think is very interesting, which is this memo that was just declassified last month from the Moscow Embassy of the United States. Wayne Mary wrote a memo during the height of the shock therapy policy. And he said, it's a mistake for the United States to say that when a country rejects what the United States tells them to do, that that's undemocratic. Because he said he doesn't know anyone who supported the shock therapy policy except the Western bankers who were coming in to use it to loot Russia. And so this is not new what's happening in Romania. This has been an ongoing policy. And look, you see it in terms of the opposition to what's happening in Pakistan, the opposition to the fact that Thailand and Indonesia are moving toward the BRICS. You know, that there's a shift in the world. And what's Blinken say? Why are they turning their back on democracy? So, you know, I think this is the hypocrisy of democracy. Now, just one thing, Alex, you mentioned Sikorsky. His wife is one of the worst people, Ann Applebaum,
Yes.
a top Atlantic Council operative. And the two of them are a real pair, aren't they? I mean, they haven't stopped saying that Putin must be removed. They're completely committed to the idea of regime change in Russia, no matter what. And that's the so-called democracy forces from the Atlantic Council.
I think that between Sikorsky and Applebaum, no two people ever deserved each other more.
Oh my gosh, I think the regime change in Russia is absolutely hopeless, pointless venture. Just isn't going to happen. Just isn't going to happen. Okay, and then the UK, a shining beacon of prosperity and peace and democracy
And freedom of speech.
and
Yes.
and freedom of speech. That's right. Where the those that carry out evil are brought to justice.
No, they're brought to the parliament.
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, I don't know if you know some of the stuff that's happening. So there was a reading this week in Parliament on the Education and Welfare Bill, which will actually diminish parents' rights to have a say over how their children are educated, and it actually gives the state greater control over children than parents have. So, of course, Keir Starmer supported this bill, and his party have just voted it through.
Well, parents generally don't know what's best for their children, and they shouldn't have the right to say it.
Alex, thank you for pointing that out. I stand corrected.
I just don't want your podcast to get cancelled, you know?
Alex is taking the point of view of the children.
Yeah, and then
I'm familiar with that argument, Alex.
Coming up is the Climate and Nature Bill, which is, I think Caroline Lucas, outgoing Green MP, had a lot to do with this bill, apparently. It's a private member's bill that the government are supporting. And essentially, one of the things it will do is it will keep Britain in the dark. So we have to cut get to net zero by 2030, but it would include the calculations of CO2 emissions from food that's imported. So we reduce the CO2 emissions from imported food.
So I know that this is maybe obvious, and you know, this might come across as hand-wringing, but I find it just insane and surreal that they even push these policies forward, but they don't make any sense unless the whole world is doing it, because you could completely obliterate the British economy and accomplish exactly nothing if other countries are not doing the same, because it's not like the airspace above Britain is going to have perfectly temperate climate, right? And perfectly reduced CO2 emissions, while elsewhere we're going to have global warming and climate change and whatever it is that is going to destroy us in what do we have, 10 years maybe, or it's, I don't know.
Yeah.
We always seem to have 10 years to turn it around, or else we're going to be fried to a crisp.
But I think your point, Alex, exposes the flaw in this whole argument. It's not about climate change. It pretends to be. It's really about impoverishment and depopulation. That's what it's about.
Yes.
You reduce the population, and then a smaller population are easier to rule over, requiring a smaller elite.
Yes,
That's
especially if they're impoverished populations,
impoverished, hungry.
which is why they absolutely want us all impoverished.
Yeah.
You know, people who are doing well and who are comfortably enjoying their lives are not so keen on sending their children to die in some war in East Asia or in Eurasia, because somebody says that we've always been at war with Eurasia, so don't even question it. But people who are desperately poor, military is a way of getting yourself maybe a decent life against the odds.
Yeah.
And Rich, you mentioned the question of depopulation. This, of course, is a long-time policy of the British royal family. And of course, before that, it goes back to Malthus and the idea of the Malthusian policy, that you can't keep up the food supply with the growing population, so therefore you have to let people die off.
Yeah.
This is not just some old meme. This actually was adopted as U.S. national policy under Kissinger, National Security Study Memo 200 from 1975, which was declassified until the late 80s, which talked about how there are 13 countries, all African or Asian. Actually, I think there were 2 in South America, but all of darker skinned populations. The population is growing too fast. It's threatening the raw material resources needed for the U.S. economy, and therefore the U.S. should use food as a weapon. That became the actual policy under Kissinger of the United States. And you see that in terms of the International Monetary Fund conditionalities policies, the economic hitmen, so-called. You see it in terms of what's happening, for example, with the heating bills, the taking away the subsidies for poor people in the United Kingdom who are going to freeze this winter if it continues to be cold. So it's not some kind of fantasy or conspiracy theory to say they do want to kill off people. And the famous philosopher Bertrand Russell said, so far, wars have been disappointing in their ability to reduce population. But a plague once every generation or so would allow those who survive to live comfortably. That's a paraphrase of Bertrand Russell. But that's what we're seeing carried out with the war policy, the austerity policy, the refusal of any international body to intervene against the Israeli massacre of Palestinian civilians. And I find this the question that LaRouche once said, do we have the moral fitness to survive? If we can't find a way to stop Netanyahu, we'll have given up the right to call ourselves a human race.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then what we have with the British Imperial elite doing what they've done in India and in Ireland, but to their own people, depriving them of food, depriving them of liberty, depriving them of energy, because there were reports today that Britain has about a week's gas reserves left, about a week's worth of gas left in its reserve.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And this is a nation that could be, has sufficient coal and gas and oil to heat itself. So the other thing that this climate and nature bill is going to do is going to promote more rewilding. So you have less land being used for farming. It's going to be used for solar panels and for wind turbines and for just letting, good farmland being allowed to go wild so nature can flourish. Meanwhile, the British people will starve. It will also allow the minister, I'm going to do more on this because it's shocking what this bill is going to do, but allow the government to write rules which will prevent the import of petrol and diesel. Nice. So that's the climate and nature bill. And then today, I think something like 17 councils cancelled their local elections, which are due in May. And they did so because, ostensibly the reason was because the government is going to restructure local authorities. And they're going to do it in such a way that they're actually going to increase centralization and decrease people's say over what happens in their local areas by setting up people's assemblies, which will be full of non-elected appointees, little politburos running the show bypassing the local authorities. And one way that the government have been setting this all up is because they've been impoverishing local authorities. So many local authorities in the UK are going broke. So they're just not getting the support from central government because, of course, central government is giving that support to Zelensky and spending it elsewhere. So that's coming up. And then, of course, the assisted murder bill, also known as the assisted dying bill, which is just horrific. So there's more of that going on. And I do want to mention the whole stuff about the rape gangs. You know, I'm Pakistani, I'm Muslim, I'm a child protection social worker. And I've been watching this discourse, and Elon Musk has been talking about it. And I know, Alex, you must know about this.
Well, I know about it, but the extent of it seems so much worse than anything I imagined. That I'm part of me is thinking this can't be right. How is this even possible?
Well, I think it's consistent. I think it's absolutely consistent. It's what with the fact that 8 million children go missing every year, 40,000 go missing in the UK every year, and then 397,000 migrant children have gone missing in the US under Biden. And that doesn't account for, I'm going to get really dark here, that doesn't account for all the children that are born and that go missing and have never been acknowledged. You know, they're just born in some chamber somewhere and then used and abused and then killed off. The issue with this, with these gangs, it's the way that I regard it is these are localized Epstein-like operations.
Yeah.
And that it's a complete lie that the social services and the police didn't want to investigate because they didn't want to cause racial conflict. That's just a pretense, a cover, a complete fraud. No, they didn't want to investigate because they're complicit, because some of them were involved. And the way that I speculate is that as a frontline child protection social worker, and I've chosen to remain frontline, and I have more experience than the vast majority of social workers because I've chosen to remain frontline. I've never ever been in a situation or been witness to a situation where I or any of my colleagues have ever been told, "Oh, don't investigate this because of their ethnicity or race or whatever." Never. What would happen in a situation like this is if I come across it, I'd pass it on to my manager. My manager would pass it up the chain to the director of children's services in the local authority. It would likely go up to the children's minister, up to central government, and the same with the police. And somewhere at the top, somewhere in that chain of command, that chain of accountability, would say, pass the message down, don't touch this. Interpol are investigating. MI5, Special Branch are investigating. Don't touch this.
So it's conceivable to you that this charge that Starmer ignored it, let it pass when he was in charge of public prosecution, that's a potentially legitimate charge?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
he has a really poor track record. He was given evidence about Mohammed Al-Fayed's sexual assaults, didn't investigate. Jimmy Savile's, he was given evidence that Jimmy Savile didn't investigate because he was too busy trying to extradite and imprison Julian Assange.
Yeah.
Well, I think that it's worse than that. I think that Jimmy Savile's investigation was sabotaged deliberately. It just wasn't meant to happen. It's not because he was distracted with Julian Assange. It's that because Jimmy Savile, there's so much that overflows into the royal family.
Yeah.
That his assignment was to kill that matter investigation dead.
Yep.
And he did that. And this is why he became Sir Keir Starmer.
Yes.
You know, this discussion brings up a very important point that I just want to get out before we finish, which is the confirmation hearings coming up for Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel.
Harley, before we come to that, I just want to say something. I knew about Jimmy Savile in 1986. You know, I was I was just fresh out of high school. I knew about him then. So it was an open secret, and I was also told that he was incredibly well connected, which turned out to be the case. And what we have right now with this whole grooming gang, on the one hand, it's being used by the racist right to demonize Muslims and Pakistanis and, you know, fulfill that racist agenda. And on the other hand, what I notice amongst the left wing and the Pakistanis and the Muslim community is a knee-jerk reaction that, like, no, to deny the problem. And then what's being lost is the plight of the children, and that I think this actually was racialized by the Pakistanis, by these men who carried it out, who think nothing of white people, who preyed upon these vulnerable girls and boys who were in care homes. And I actually remember I worked in a care home in Bradford in the early 90s, and there was a 14-year-old girl there, 14, 15, who was talking about having a Pakistani boyfriend. And she'd be off going seeing her Pakistani boyfriend. And we didn't know anything about him, and we weren't able to stop it. And I don't know if it was part of some sort of local Epstein operation or grooming gang. Or who knows? But that kind of vulnerable girl who doesn't have a family around her to protect her and take care of her, who will fall prey to any guy who gives her attention. And then there's I listened to an interview by Sammy Woodhouse, who's actually been to court and given evidence and says that she was mistreated this way and abused this way. And has had Pakistani men and Pakistani women approach her and say, look, this happened to me. They did this to me because I said I was going to speak out. So it's just absolutely horrific. And there's a fine line to tread in this, right? Which is that whoever does this, whether it's Catholics or Jews or secular people, it is abhorrent and it needs to be addressed. So just wanted to say that. Thank you, Harley. Thank you, Alex.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is the issue, the underlying issue of the Gabbard and Patel nominations, is that the establishment is terrified that someone who's not part of the old boys network could become the director of national intelligence for Trump, in the case of Gabbard. So the line is that she's not experienced. She doesn't know what she's doing. Well, she's very experienced. She's a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve or Air Force Reserve. She was in the war zone in Iraq. She, instead of just listening to the media, she went and did a fact-finding mission twice in Syria. And the problem is they don't like what she found out, which was that MI6 and CIA were arming the terrorist gangs that were destroying the Syrian government. And the same question with Patel. He was a top prosecutor before he became his position in Devin Nunes' investigative committee in the House that was looking at the abuses that were part of Russiagate. And what do they find? The CIA, the FBI, the top officials of the intelligence community openly lying, as in the Hunter Biden laptop. And so the people who are the liars are the ones the media are going to report that Gabbard and Patel aren't qualified. And you know who they went to in the UK? Sir Richard Dearloffe. He's been all over the US press talking about how it is that you can't trust Gabbard. And why? Because it will undermine the special relationship with the Five Eyes. The British will not be able to trust the Americans.
Well, that it would, and it will.
And that would be good. Huh?
Yes, and I think this is why I am very, very intrigued that Elon Musk, who is now, for all practical purposes, part of the U.S. government, or the incoming one, he has taken such a sharp aim at the British establishment, and it can't be. It's not a random thing. This is again deliberate. This is again premeditated, and there's a method to all this. And I'm encouraged because one of the ways that the British establishment could get away with what they were doing in the United States, probably for many decades, is because somehow they've been able to do it from out of the shadows. So that's one thing that you cannot talk about. You can even criticize Israel on U.S. media, but you cannot really mention the British connection. And I always remember during the first term of the Trump administration, we had this Russiagate sausage nonstop being recycled through the media, and the only anchor who was covering it correctly, somewhat, was Sean Hannity at Fox News, because he was maybe the only one who was overtly sympathetic to Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And nevertheless, even though it was glaringly obvious that it was a British operation, because there was
the Steele dossier.
Yeah.
yeah, there was Christopher Steele, and Christopher Steele was reporting to Richard Dearlove, the former MI6 guy, and Christopher Steele himself was a former MI6 guy. And then there was Stefan Halper, and there was, off the top of my head, I forget, but there's probably
the Australian guy, Downer, I think.
Downer. He was Australian, but he was also part of the Five Eyes, if not MI6 directly. Anyway, it has MI6 fingerprints all over it, and even if you don't know very much about anything, you look at, well, these people are all linked to London and to MI6. How strange that they should be so deeply involved in U.S. Politics, in these relentless attacks on Donald Trump, yet the media never mentions it. And Sean Hannity was having night after night after night breathless reporting about this, and he would always say Russian lies, Russian disinformation, and a dossier concocted by foreign nationals. So, he would frame the Russians, and the only Russian in the whole mix was this Igor, I forget his last name, who was working for, who was apparently a guy with a bit of a drinking problem, who was living in London and working for who? For Christopher Steele. And so he was feeding him stories about this and that, which he probably invented out of whole cloth. They told him, like, think up some dirt about Donald Trump. Okay, boss. And that's how it happened. And then it became a whole thing. But everybody else was British. And then, on Fox News, it's as though Sean Hannity there, with all the resources and all the writers and researchers that he has under his control, cannot put the two and two together and say, like, maybe we need to investigate the British role in this whole affair, which was one of the worst political scandals in the American history, which practically paralyzed Donald Trump's first administration. So the fact that Elon Musk is going against the British so overtly and so brazenly and undiplomatically is, to me, a big encouragement, because it tells me that they will probably the special relationship is going to go to a very, very rough revision, and it's probably going to end, I think.
Alex LaRouche was known for many, many years as the one who was identifying the British as the problem in the United States. And the Get LaRouche Task Force was initiated from London through Henry Kissinger. But it's interesting, you then look 30 years later, how did Russiagate get started? It was Hennigan of GCHQ who came to the United States in December of 2015 saying, we're picking up strange cyber messages from the Russians related to the US election campaign. And who did he go to? He didn't go to the NSA. He went to John Brennan and the CIA. And that was the point at which the Clintons picked up, or Hillary Clinton, I should say, picked up on the whole question of the Steele dossier later, the Perkins Coie law firm, and so on. But it was an American branch of British intelligence that was paralyzing the incoming president based on easily disputable lies. And I think Trump is aware now that he made some mistakes and trusted some of the wrong people. And bringing in someone like Musk, who can stand on his own, or someone like Patel, who's a fighter, or Tulsi Gabbard, who's a fighter, or even RFK Jr., who's a fighter, there's a potential that this whole crowd can be defeated, which will then spill over into the United Kingdom, because Starmer is a classic example of the emperor in the new clothes. He's standing there naked as an operative of this. In a sense, he goes back to Tony Blair, because Blair was one of the key guys who brought the dossier from Dearlove to Bush on weapons of mass destruction. So it's the same crowd.
Yeah, and just
I'll share something else here, Harley, which is, I think, very relevant, and that is that there's this. This is, I think, bigger than Trump and Musk. During his first administration, Trump created the Space Force, which, I didn't know what that was about or why, but I was guessing that there was a reason, and we were not being told what the reason was. Okay, so this connects a few dots, but without I cannot say what it is because I don't know, but I've been observing all this. So over the years, I went to these Eurasia integration forums, which are organized every year in places. They used to be organized in Verona, Italy, and it used to be called Verona, the Verona Eurasian Integration Forum, or something like that. And it was held in the city of Verona. And then once the special military operation started in Ukraine, then they organized one in Baku, Azerbaijan, then one in Samarkand, and then this last one was in UAE. And the organization that, okay, so back up. A few months ago, the US Space Force gives a major contract to Elon Musk's SpaceX. Okay, billions worth. I forget what the number is. And then I think within 2 weeks from that, this same bank, which organizes these Eurasian integration forums, announces a major investment in Elon Musk's SpaceX. And then it turns out that it's the very same bank which sponsored the performance of the Nutcracker in Milan. So you see, I think that below the surface, below the information that hits the headlines, there's some kind of a conspiracy going on, because I think that even among the, let's say, relatively privileged members of our society, there's a recognition that the way things are going under this Anglo-American Malthusian, how do you call it, system of governance, we're going to destroy ourselves, and fast. And so I think that the pushback is real. And it's not just Donald Trump and just Elon Musk, RFK, this handful of people that you say like, oh, well, they'll just eliminate them like that. What chance do they stand against this big machinery? But I think that the cavalry is bigger than we know. And I think that it's much, much better versed at how the game is played behind the curtains than we know.
Yes. Thank you, Alex. And I just want to go back to something that what you've both said about Russiagate and it being an MI6 operation, that, they started it all. I did read Richard Poe's How the British Invented Communism and Blamed It on the Jews while I was away. And I've recorded an interview with Richard Poe, which will be out in a few days' time after this one goes.
Oh, cool.
Yes, that was really, really informative about so much of our hidden history. And then with Donald Trump, what I can see from what you said, Alex, and what you said, Harley, is that he's out to get revenge. And also he's out to make sure that he doesn't have to deal with that issue again. So then he sends his attack dog, Musk, to take on the UK government. And I think, please God. And the other thing that I noticed, when you mentioned Tony Blair, Alex, is that Tony Blair, with all his faults and his mendacity, he did actually have some political nonce. He was able to move a crowd. He was able to negotiate and plot and scheme. Machiavellian. But ever since then, successive prime minister has got, I don't know, like more and more idiotic, more and more useless, less and less capable. That we don't have any heavyweights like we had before, say like Margaret Thatcher. I mean, Tony Blair was a midget compared to her, and I'm not a fan of Margaret Thatcher, but they just get more and more useless. And I was wondering today, I don't think Keir Starmer's going to make it through the end of his term, through this Labour Parliament.
Yeah.
and hopefully he will go at some point this year. But then I'm like, who's going to replace him from the Labour Party? Because they're all even more useless than him.
You know, we're seeing that kind of downgraded capability across the board, you know, from Merkel to Schultz. You see it in the US from the foreign policy side, from Brzezinski, who was a complete lunatic, but at least had a coherent worldview, which was shaped by British geopolitics. His protege was Madeleine Albright, who was just a killer, and her protege is Blinken, who's a soulless, mindless, bad salesman. And so you see this kind of drop off. And in the midst of it, you have basically a Hollywood type salesman himself, Trump, who's more genuinely American than all the people who are around in politics right now. And that's what attracted a lot of the voters to him. I don't see that. I don't see Vidal as someone like that in Germany. I don't see anyone in France. Maloney is just being propped up in Italy. You know, it's time for a new group of leaders.
Yep. And there are those that are capable in some way or another. You know, the Orban, I think, Fico, but
well, you have them in the UK. You know, you have Andrew Bridgen, you have George Galloway, probably others.
But they've never led. Galloway and Bridgen have never led a mass movement in any way. They don't have that experience or that skill or that. But the downgrading, absolutely. You think we risk going from Obama to Biden to Kamala Harris?
Yeah, but today, you know, Rich. Today, you don't need those skills because everything you need to know about anything is on YouTube. So you just like work it out as you go along.
Thank you, Alex. I shall bear that in mind. Or you can just ask ChatGPT or Grok.
There you go.
There you go. Do the thinking for me. Do the thinking. Alex, Harley, thank you so much. It's been so great. It's been really, really useful and valuable. Look forward to having you on again. Please subscribe. Follow Harley and Alex on Twitter. I'll have their links in the description below. And between now and when I see you next, there is hope, there is freedom, and fill your pockets with that. This is Rich and Harley and Alex signing out. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.